last-minute shake-up at 5:30 a.m., laundry situation not good. And when your focus is on helping your clients, it's easy to forget about yourself. But NASM knows trainers.
Morning, Ryan. Is okay.
And staying in front of the day isn't always as
Thanks,
simple
Ryan.
as 1,
What's
2,
up?
3. So when the unexpected has you pressing pause,
What's the latest on creatine?
I'm going to get back to you on that.
let NASM1 help you press play. Visit NASM.org to sign up for a membership today.
Well, hello there, listeners. Welcome to this week's episode of the Better Than Fine podcast. I'm your host, wellness coach, and well-being expert, Darlene Marshall. And if my social media feed is at all to be believed, a bunch of us are walking out around with a dreaded case of the dun-dun-dun hormonal imbalances. Ooh. Especially because I am now apparently a woman of a certain age. That age is 40. I'm 40, and my social media feed seems to have totally freaked out about the fact that I am now middle-aged and all of the things that that might mean. And in addition to the beauty treatments and the comments on cellulite and all of the other nonsense that it is pushing me, there's a lot of content out there about hormones. And so this is going to be the first in a slow drip series about hormones and hormone balance and what do you need to know and how you can be thinking about and framing your behavior to help your hormones. And also so you can understand your hormones in a way that makes you less susceptible to manipulative social media marketing practices. Because if you know anything about this show, you know that I want to empower you with good information that you can rely on and trust so that you can make the right decision for you. So it seems like hormones are just all the rage this fall. And with all of the hormone imbalance talk that I've been hearing about, it seems like there is a ton of information about this particular hormone that we seem to be labeling as a stress hormone and how to balance it out. Maybe you've been seeing it too. It's cortisol. And according to my feeds, if my cortisol is out of balance, it can cause weight gain and stretch marks and bloating and insomnia and depression and moodiness and cramps and energy problems and depression. I think I said that one already. Anxiety. It just sounds like this laundry list of things that could have so many causes, so many underlying things, that if you're struggling with how you're feeling physically, and some influencer says, are you feeling bloated and tired and anxious and depressed? You go, yeah, because sometimes we feel a bit off. So the question really is your cortisol out of balance? How would you know? And how could you be more empowered? I think that it's time that we might rethink some cortisol information. And that's what this episode's about. So welcome to those of you in chat on the live feed. I'm so glad to have you with us. For those who are listening on the replay, we live stream the show every Wednesday afternoon at 4 p.m. on the NASM podcasting network so that you can live ask questions. And I want to invite those of you in the feed to go ahead and do that. So let's get to it. I'm going to start by taking you back in the way, way back machine to your high school biology class. So we can talk a little bit about what hormones are and how they work in the body, because that's going to give you an idea of how cortisol shows up in your day-to-day life. A hormone is a chemical that is produced by glands, which are little organs that are all over your body. And those glands are all part of the endocrine system. So these are chemical messengers that tell other tissues in the body what to do. And oftentimes that is stimulated by something in your nervous system. Your nervous system being the fight or flight, that you probably heard about, but also rest and digest. And so your nervous system goes, hey, there's something to react to. And then your endocrine system goes, oh, sure, and pops out some hormones. So let's say that you get a text from your partner, or maybe it's a person that you're hoping is going to be your partner, and they say something like cute and flirty, and your nervous system gets all kind of gushy, and then you get this little bit of hormone dopamine. And dopamine is a molecule, they call it the molecule of more. Dopamine is the hormone of want. And so you're like, yeah, I can't wait to see them later. That's dopamine talking. Or you're on your phone and you're scrolling, you see a cat video. And you're like, oh, this cat is so super duper cute. And your nervous system goes, ah. And your endocrine system goes, serotonin. And you feel that like cutesy feeling. Or your boss sends you a Slack chat that says, come to my office right now, please, period. And your nervous system goes, beep, explicative. And you feel your heart rate shoot up. You get a flush in your cheeks. Your palms get a bit sweaty. That is a combination of neuroepinephrine and cortisol. That is your stress response. That's what most people think of as that feeling. So cortisol is produced by the adrenal glands, which sit right above your kidneys. And all hormones, when the endocrine system reacts to whatever stimulus your nervous system is responding to, all hormones just dump right into your bloodstream. And then they're circulated through your whole body. And it's whatever tissues that react to that particular hormone that then do the thing that they're trying to do. And so in the case of cortisol, it causes a whole bunch of things to happen in the body. And you're going to understand a little bit more in a second. But the idea here is that your endocrine system is producing responses faster than your conscious mind can register. So that way, whether it's a stimulus of threat or a stimulus of pleasure, your body can react faster than your mind could process the information. And in the case of cortisol, it's activating a reaction to something that desperately needs your attention. You've probably heard a bit on your feeds about cortisol, something related to stress, right? Like the example I just gave about the boss says, come to my office right now, please. But we don't think about all of the good things it could be. Eric called me yesterday and gave me some news. And when he first called me, he said, what are you doing right now? I thought, oh God, something's wrong. Is he okay? Are you okay? Am I okay? Because your brain jumps to the threat, the problem. That's cortisol talking. So oftentimes people think of cortisol as a stress hormone. And there's a lot of people out there on the tubes saying that all of us have our cortisol out of whack, that it's too high or it's too much or it's coming at the wrong times. But what if that's not the helpful way to think about cortisol? What if this too much, too high, too this, too that is out of whack, and it's just another tactic to try to sell us more supplements and more programs and more stuff we don't necessarily need? If we could just think about cortisol a different way, that's a bit more empowering. So we're going to look at what cortisol does, what a healthy cortisol rhythm would look like, and then you'll have the information that you need to decide for yourself what's going to make sense in your life. So cortisol often gets called a stress hormone because it's released as part of our fight or flight response. Fight or flight response is a reaction of the autonomic nervous system, right? Those automatic responses I was just talking about. And fight or flight is typically this upregulation of your stress response, your nervous system response, to prepare if there's something to deal with, a problem to deal with. It has a bunch of other jobs. Two of the biggest jobs of cortisol are to regulate your sleep and wake cycle, what we call circadian rhythm, and regulating metabolism. Now, it might sound like those are two completely different things, right? Your fight or flight response, your circadian cycle, and your metabolism. Why would one hormone have to do with all of those things? That might seem totally random, but I want you to think about it a little bit deeper for just a second. Let's say that you're about to fall asleep and something scary or threatening happens right in that moment that you're about to doze off. You don't want to keep dozing off. You want to pop awake so you can deal with the problem. And if something stressful happens at any point in your day, you're going to need blood sugar. You're going to need resources available so that you can deal with the problem. And so the stress response, the fight or flight response, also governs metabolism. Because not only do we need to stay awake, we got to deal with the problem. And anytime you're awake, you're going to need energy on hand. So in that way, Cortisol touches all these different tissues in the body that relate to how we respond when we're alert to a potential problem, a threat, whatever it needs that we need to be dealing with. So the body, when it's working the way that it should, stress isn't the only time that you release cortisol. You release it whenever you need resources on hand, and it's part of the normal rhythm of the sleep and wake cycle, which is why I want you to think about it a little differently. You're listening to the Better Than Fine podcast. I'm your host, Darlene Marshall, and today I'm inviting you to rethink your relationship to cortisol. Maybe it's not just a stress hormone. Maybe there's other ways that you can think about it that would be more helpful, more useful, and help you to build a more thriving, lively, functional lifestyle. So I mentioned a moment ago, cortisol is one of the key hormones in your circadian rhythm. Now, circadian rhythm isn't just sleep and wake cycle. It's also things like digestion and food timing, other hormone releases. Really, it's any regular thing that happens throughout your day at a specific time or sequence of events. The body likes to get into a cycle. It likes to get into a rhythm. And this isn't a new idea. This isn't just a modern concept. Ayurvedic medicine has known this for at least 5,000 years. Traditional Chinese healing traditions, they've recognized it since the 2nd century BC. So that's about or a little bit over 2,000 years ago. Cortisol's job in this circadian cycle, this rhythm that we have recognized for literally thousands of years, is to control alertness. So in a healthy circadian rhythm, cortisol is going to peak just before you wake up. And that happens to wake you up, right? You've got to be alert enough to rise out of your light phase sleep and open your eyes and start the day. And then throughout the day, cortisol should fluctuate up and down in response to your environment, dependent on what you're doing, dependent on what's going on. But gradually across the day, assuming that you're not overstimulating yourself, assuming that there is nothing to fight or flee from, it'll taper down and then bottom out just about when you're falling asleep. And so in a healthy circadian rhythm, cortisol peaks right when you're waking up, tapers, and bottoms out when you go to sleep. Now, interestingly, for all of the sleep nerds out there, for any of the other kinds of nerds out there, melatonin has the opposite rhythm, right? Your body produces melatonin. It's a hormone. It peaks as you fall asleep, and it bottoms out when you wake up in the morning, right? And they should be in opposition. So it isn't just stress. It's also about governing, waking you up and stimulating you in the right times so that you're alert when you should be, and making sure that if you need to be alert, you get the right blood pressure, the right sugar on hand so you can deal with whatever you're alert to, right? Whatever's going on. Now, there are situations where your body might make too much cortisol, right? The chronic stress. Right? How many times in your life have you heard, oh yes, chronic stress? Are you suffering from chronic stress? If you go through extended periods of high stress time, that elevated cortisol, like being on 11 all the time, can result in weight gain, right? Because you're dropping blood sugar all the time. Eventually, that's going to affect your adiposity, your fat tissues. So weight gain. It weakens the immune system, so you tend to get sick a lot. Blood sugar increases can result in an elevated A1C, and eventually, if you do it long enough, type 2 diabetes, anxiety, depression, moodiness, digestive issues. Now, that might seem like a weird one to go along with elevated cortisol, but the nervous system also controls digestive speed. And when we're stressed, digestion slows down. You don't want to have to stop and do a poo when you're running from a bear. And so if digestion slows down because of stress, because of elevated cortisol, that can cause all kinds of issues, right? Constipation, hemorrhoids, IBS that's periodic, and elevated blood pressure. All of that is related to the fight or flight response. And so when you get that stuck on, we end up with the body starting to struggle with metabolism, with blood pressure, with all of these secondary systems because of the stress. And when I work with clients, and they want to change their body. They want to change their lifestyle and their weight. They're often surprised that I start with, well, how's your stress? Are you sleeping regularly? Are you waking at regular times? Are you able to tone down your mind at the end of the day? They think it's going to be all diet and exercise. And they often will have histories of restrictive dieting and overdoing it at the gym. And then they wonder why they struggle to lose weight and they start getting weight gain rebounds. And this is a big part of why. Restrictive dieting over exercise, it's just more stress on an overly alerted system. So if your nervous system is dialed up in that way, your body's going to hold on to weight, especially around the middle, because cortisol is saying, hey, keep on alert. There's stuff to deal with, maybe in a way that's not particularly helpful. But remember when I said a moment ago, let's reconsider cortisol instead of as a stress hormone, as an alertness hormone. And if we reconsider it that way, stress is a bit too vague for a lot of people. They don't understand because they're so adapted to feeling overstimulated and stressed out all the time that you'll ask them like, hey, how's your stress? And they're like chewing their nails and ripping their hair out. And they say like, my stress is fine. I'm great with stress. And then I ask them to do a nutritional recall and they'll tell me all about how they can't relax without their 5 o'clock cocktail, all while chewing on their cuticles. But they say their stress is fine because to them, they're doing great because they're so adapted to the feeling of being stressed out all the time. And I find that most people I work with don't even realize that they are overstimulated. And when you're overstimulated, you can bet that cortisol is doing its thing because overstimulation is telling you be on alert. Be aware. There's stuff going on that you need to attend to. And that feeling of tired but wired is cross-wiring the endocrine system. You're listening to the Better Than Fine podcast. I'm your host, Darlene Marshall, and I want to invite you today to rethink how you think about cortisol in your life. What if it's not a stress hormone? What if it's an alertness hormone and you change the way that you're stimulating yourself to show up in your life? So I want you to consider that there's really 2 levels of too much cortisol. There's 2 ways that this overstimulation can show up in your life. So the first would be clinical, right? Like a medical problem that needs to be addressed. This is the person who is struggling with like anxiety and depression. Maybe they've got type 2 diabetes or even an elevated A1C. That person should be working with a doctor, not just with a wellness coach or some influencer, right? They want to be working with a medical practitioner because at that point, that type of dysregulation is a medical problem. And the way that you would know, if you suspect this is you go see your physician, and what they're going to ask you to do is to do a test of your resting cortisol. They might do a blood test. That's less likely. What they're more likely to do is have you do a salivary test because you can measure cortisol with saliva. And a salivary test allows you to swab the mouth, put it in a tube labeled with a time, and you do it right upon waking, periodically through the morning, midday, afternoon, and right before bed. And just like we talked about earlier in the episode, the way that you get peaks and valleys in cortisol, right? Peaking when you wake, bottoming out before you go to bed. They're looking in your saliva. Is it following a normative curve? And if it's not, that can explain, okay, I'm struggling to fall asleep. I can't seem to wake up in the morning. I'm sluggish all day. I have insomnia. That's how you know that's actually cortisol and not this second tier, I think, of like the too much, which is when it's not clinical. So if it is clinical, if you're having those kinds of more significant medical issues, go see a doctor about it. Don't take my word for it. But if you're not there, right, you think that it's not clinical, but you are a bit concerned about your relationship to stress and stimulation, you're moody, your energy is not consistent throughout the day, maybe you struggle to wake up in the morning, you have trouble falling asleep at night, You work out, you eat well, but there's still a spare tire, especially around the middle, occasional digestive issues. That person isn't going to have the medical grade cortisol, crosswire here, which is called Cushing syndrome. Cushing syndromes is the excess cortisol, where your cortisol is so high that's actually a medical problem. These are people who might be stimulating themselves at the wrong time of the day. They might not know they have a problem with stress. How does that person reshape their relationship with this alertness hormone? Right? Because we've been talking about cortisol as a stress hormone for, I don't know, I think at least 15 years. I've heard the phrase like, oh yes, your stress hormone, cortisol. Oh. But that's not helping people, or we wouldn't still be here. So instead of being a stress hormone and avoiding this idea of like, don't stress me out, what if we start to think about it as being alert at the appropriate times, right? If we engage with this idea that cortisol is an alertness hormone and that we want to be awake and alert and aware early in the day, and then we want to be soothed and chill before we go to bed, then we can start engaging with a rhythm of life that works for you, whatever that looks like for you. I'm a lark. I'm up at 5 o'clock in the morning, even on days like today. I didn't have any calls until 11, still up at 5 a.m., much to everyone in my life's chagrin. Whereas my partner, he is a night owl. His peak is happening much later in the day. Now, those variances, those nuances are natural. It's called your chronotype. And so for each of us, there is a kind of 50-50 genetic and lifestyle time of the day when we peak our cortisol, right? That waking alertness window. And then you've got a natural valley at another time in the day where you're your most chill. And so what we want to be doing is reinforcing our alertness at our peak time and then allowing the nervous system to calm and regulate for your valley time. So how does that look like? What does that show up like in your life for you? When you hear people talk about bright light first thing in the morning, you probably have heard it's been a big thing. Huberman started talking about it like 3-4 years ago. And then it felt like for a while, just about every wellness person was after being like early morning sunlight, go for walks, have your happy light. What that's about is that there are photoreceptors in the eye that are tied to the endocrine system that stimulate the release of cortisol so that it peaks at the right time to wake you in alignment with the natural daily rhythm of sunlight. So we can flip that on its head by governing our relationship to light stimulation. So if you get up in the morning and you get bright light into the eyes, especially overhead light, first thing in the day, obviously my favorite bright overhead light first thing in the day is sunlight and going for a walk. But I also live pretty far north. I live way in upstate New York. And when I got up at 5 o'clock this morning, the sun was not up. The sun was not up until 7 o'clock in the morning. And it was 33 degrees when I got up this morning. So that's not always going to work, right? Sometimes we're going to need artificial light, and that's okay. That's one way to help stimulate cortisol production early in the day and get that rhythm set right. Caffeine early in the day can help too. And then as the day passes, we want to dial down that stimulation. So cutting caffeine off midday. Now, I get plenty of pushback from people who say, oh, I'm European, I'm Italian, I'm this, I'm that, I'm whatever. So I can have caffeine at dinner. Even for people who are fast caffeine metabolizers, it still compromises sleep quality. So even if you have caffeine late in the day, it still messes with the quality of your sleep that night and dysregulates and disrupts this cortisol rhythm we're talking about. So if you are someone who struggles with your sleep quality, if you struggle with regulating your alertness throughout the day, you're going to want to taper your caffeine earlier and earlier in the day as you dial in your circadian cycle. Turning down bright lights after sundown. So dimming your computer and phone screens, dimming down the ring lights. I'm staring into one right now, but the sun's not quite down yet. It will be in January by this time. Maybe saving the screaming, yelling murder shows for when you do chores on Saturdays instead of doing them in the evenings at like 10 o'clock on a Tuesday. Workout timing can also be really important. Some people, they can get away with doing high intensity workouts in the evenings. But most people, and I say most because not everything affects everyone the same way all the time, but most people within a few hours of bed, they want to keep the workouts moderate or light intensity and save the real high intensity stuff for midday or even early day so that they don't disrupt this alertness rhythm. Now, another one you might not have thought about before would be the relationship of sugar and alcohol to cortisol. And this is one that can feel like a reach, especially if you're in a culture where going out at night, having indulgence, partying, alcohol, woo. The problem is there's twofolds. So eating a lot of sugar can spike cortisol. You consume a lot of sugar, you get an insulin release, and the drop in insulin that comes afterward causes a stress response in the nervous system because blood sugar gets too low, and then cortisol gets released to bring blood sugar back up. So you want to be mindful of just how much sugar you're eating and on that sugar timing. And sugar before bed can disrupt sleep quality. Alcohol also spikes cortisol, which can feel really weird if you're someone who has a drink to relax, or even, it's been a while since I had a client with this habit, but I have in the past had clients who would drink alcohol because they felt that it helped them fall asleep. And they were very hesitant to give up on that particular habit. But alcohol in the evening causes cortisol release. So even if it helps you nod off, as you metabolize it, you might wake up because alcohol also causes blood sugar drop, or sleep quality can be very, very poor as a consequence, which then you're wiring that into your circadian cycle, and that just totally screws up the cortisol rhythm. So consider that if you're getting poor sleep, you feel stressed, then you have a drink to relax, that drink then messes up sleep quality, so you get more poor sleep. You're just driving the stress flywheel at that point. There is a spider on the camera. So if something suddenly crawls across, it is not a Halloween effect. It is a little tiny spider. And if I seem distracted, that is why. You're listening to the Better Than Fine podcast. I'm your host, Darlene Marshall, with my lovely assistant, this very cute spider that might be walking across the screen. And we're talking about rethinking cortisol as an alertness hormone. I hope my sister's not watching because she hates spiders and she'll be feeling her alertness hormone with me just talking about it. So I want you to take a moment as we move forward with the cortisol in this episode and consider your normal days, your average day in your life. Do you wake up at a consistent time? Are you eating when you're hungry? Now, this is always an interesting one when I talk to people about stress, because most of us don't think about hunger and the skipping of meals and under eating as being stressful, right? Like most people think about stress as like, the boss yelled at me, I'm fighting with my partner, I got cut off in traffic, or they hit my car. But internally, what happens inside of our bodies when we are neglectful of our foundational needs, that is a stressor to the nervous system. Because if you think about our evolutionary ancestors, they wouldn't have not eaten. The times that they would have not eaten would have indicated that there were famines, that there was conflict, there was something wrong if you were just willy-nilly skipping meals. Unless it's a festival thing or a spiritual tradition that involved fasting, it wasn't something that you just do unless it was a time of lean. And that is going to be stressful to the body. The response of the nervous system is to then marshal the resources to get out there and get what you need. So as we return to this thought experiment about your day, when are you rushing? When are you snapping at people and griping with your coworkers? When do you feel anxious? Every time that happens, that stimulation of, oh, there's a problem. Oh, there's a thing. Oh, cortisol is going to be popping off to keep you alert and reactive to the perception of a problem or a threat. Then, as you think about later in the day, are you eating dinner a few hours before bed and then stopping consuming calories later in the evening? Are you letting your digestion and yourself rest in those last few hours of the day as you wind down? And how do you spend your time after dinner? Are you stimulating your alertness? Are you pushing your awareness? I've recently had somebody ask me at a workshop about keeping themselves awake until 11, 12 o'clock at night so that they'd be on the same rhythm as their partner. But they were struggling because they were waking up at 5 a.m., right? So they were doing all kinds of things to stimulate to keep themselves awake. And it was scrambling up this cortisol rhythm that we're talking about. And I want to invite you to think about it like a toddler prepping for nap time. Most toddlers, you wouldn't take them to like a party at a bowling alley, pump them up full of cake and ice cream, run them around for a while, and then expect them to be able to just lay down and take a nap, right? The toddler is going to just freak right out because they're just so overstimulated. We're all big toddlers. Some of us more toddlery than others. But the mechanisms underneath all of that are the same because we're humans. They're just scaled up. For us adults, we add up a concept of a self. And we've got a prefrontal cortex that's developed enough to regulate emotion and to create a personality. But underneath the hood, if you're screaming at the television with a cocktail in your hand, expecting to go to bed in 10 minutes, and then wondering why you're struggling to nod off or to get up in the morning, you might want to reconsider your relationship to overstimulation and tone down the alertness after dark. And the real big one, the big wild one that I find over and over again, and it seems that the younger people are, the more I am encountering this. So I've got a few clients in the last few years that are teenagers, early 20s, mid 20s. It's your phone. Lying in bed and scrolling as a soothing activity because they think that it's calming, because it feels passive. But the real trick is that our phones have been designed to be bright, and that bright, intense color screen and a dopamine producing response that stimulate your cortisol at a moment that feels passive. But if we were to look at something like your Oura Ring data, your Garmin watch data, like whatever wearable you wear that registers your heart rate variability, I bet you would see that even in that moment that you're just scrolling on the phone or playing a game or swiping away, your nervous system is being stimulated into alertness by the device. And so one of the most powerful things that you could do for sleep quality, for self-regulation, to help your cortisol get into a good rhythm is to put down the phone in the evening and not take it to bed with you, which is one of the hardest things to convince a teenager to do, let me tell you. But it is incredibly powerful. And a lot of adults are doing this too. And if you're a trainer or a coach, ask your clients if they bring the phone in the bedroom as part of your intake, and you will find that it has a significant relationship to their stress response. They will think that it is a soothing activity. And if you look at their wearable data, you will see that it is not. So stress in itself is not bad. Appropriate stress grows us, but we have to have appropriate stress in a dosage that works for that individual with the right amount of recovery from that stress so that that balances out the challenges in our lives. Cortisol is essential for showing up alert and present and aware. But if we end up overstimulated, we end up in a place that the nervous system and the metabolism are dysregulated. And that's where we get into weird trouble. So Is it out of balance? Maybe for a lot of people, but probably not in the way that most people think, where the cortisol is just spiking through the roof and it's on all the time and it runs through the whole week. No. The cortisol in many of my clients' lives is out of balance in that they are overstimulating themselves at the wrong time of day, creating alertness in the evening when they want to be calm and soothed. And then they struggle to wake and get about their day and have the energy to do the things they want to do because their energy is coming at the wrong time and they feel depleted. So what can we do? We can stimulate alertness upon waking, and in our later day, after dinner, engage in calming, soothing activities that downregulate the nervous system so that sleep quality improves. And then cortisol peaks at just the right time to keep that day-to-day circadian cycle humming along so we can keep doing the things that actually fulfill us and make us happy. So rethink your relationship with cortisol, peek inward, and of course, let me know if you have any questions. I always loved hearing your feedback. I know I got a bunch of questions and feedback on the semaglutide episode. I'm a little bit behind in my responses. Forgive me. I promise I will get back to everybody who sent me a DM. I know you have questions and I definitely want to hear them. If you have questions or feedback from this episode, email me. It is info@darlene.coach. You could also find me on Instagram and send me a DM. That is also darlene.coach. I'm on LinkedIn. If you're a fan of the show, I hope you've already subscribed. Thank you to everyone who's left a review. And if you're interested, you can check out my Substack. It's betterthanfine.substack.com. Thank you so much. Take good care of yourselves and be well.